Hey guys, happy St. Patrick's Day. Checking in today and bringing you Read Aloud number 2. Before I start reading though, I want to let you know that in our Google Classroom there is a tab at the top called Stream, and that has been where I have been posting all of these videos and links. But the tab that says classwork, if you click on it, I did post an assignment there today, and you will have to get your parents' help and permission. It is a PDF that you can download onto your computer, and it is a set of pentominoes that you can print and cut out. Now, if you do not have access to a printer, let me know and I will see what kind of arrangement I can make to get you some pentominoes to play with. Here is what a set of pentominoes looks like. A set of pentominoes is a mathematical tool consisting of 12 pieces. Each piece is made up of 5 squares that share at least one side. Pentominoes are used by mathematicians around the world to explore ideas about geometry and numbers. They are named after letters in the alphabet, although they don't all look exactly like their names. With a little practice, they can be used as puzzle pieces and put together into thousands of different rectangles of many sizes and shapes. This book begins like a set of pentominoes with separate pieces. In Chasing Vermeer, eventually all the pieces will come together. So before I start chapter 2, I just wanted to let you know that the chapter that I read to you yesterday, it was like a prequel to the book. So it introduces the idea of this letter being sent out to 3 people. The rest of this book will take place from the perspectives of Calder and Petra. It is told in third-person narration, so tell your parents what that means. And today, if you're going to be following along with the sketchnoting journey that I am on, what I did was set up a page to look like all about Petra and a page to look like it is all about Calder. And as I navigate through the next several chapters of this book, I will be adding information that helps bring Petra and Calder to life. I started with their internal character traits and then external character traits. And as I progress through reading, I can add those traits to my sketch notes, and that helps to solidify the picture of Petra and Calder that I am building in my brain as a reader. You guys might have also noticed that I had some questions while I was in the middle of reading one of the chapters, and I was still trying to develop Calder's image in my mind, but I had some questions that popped into my head and I didn't want to forget them, so I grabbed a sticky note to write those questions down. Feel free to grab a spare sheet of paper where you can jot some questions that pop into your mind as I read to you today, or you can just mark off a container somewhere on your sketch notes where questions pop up and you can write them down there. Then we can post those questions to Google Classroom and start having a conversation about Chasing Vermeer. If you would like, at the end of your sketch notes, have your parents take a picture and text them to me, and we'll get them posted to our Google Classroom so everybody can see what everybody is thinking today as we're reading. All right, here we go. Chapter 2. The letter is dead. It was a strange thing for a teacher to say. The letter is dead. By the 6th week of 6th grade, Miss Hussey still wasn't a disappointment. She had announced on the first day of school that she had no idea what they were going to work on that year or how. It all depends on what we get interested in, or what gets interested in us, she had added, as if this was obvious. Calder Pillay was all ears. He had never heard a teacher admit that she didn't know what she was doing. Even better, she was excited about it. Ms. Hussey's classroom was in the middle of a school building at the university school, in the neighborhood known as Hyde Park. The school sat on the edge of the University of Chicago campus. John Dewey, an unusual professor, had started it a century earlier as an experiment. Dewey believed in working on relevant projects in order to learn how to think. Calder had always liked the man's appropriate name. Not all teachers at the U, as it was called, still agreed with Dewey's ideas, but Miss Hussey obviously did. They began the year by arguing about whether writing was the most accurate way to communicate. Petra Andale, who loved to write, said it was. Kids like Calder, who hated it, said it wasn't. What about numbers? What about pictures? What about plain old talking? Miss Hussey had told them to investigate. They took piles of books out of the library. They found out about cave art in France, about papyrus scrolls in Egypt, about Mayan petroglyphs in Mexico, and about stone tablets from the Middle East. They tried things. They made stamps out of raw potatoes and covered the walls with symbols. They invented a sign language for hands and feet. They communicated for one whole day using nothing but drawings. Now it was almost mid-October. Would they ever study regular subjects like the other classes did? Calder didn't care. What they were doing was real exploration, real thinking, not just finding out about what a bunch of dead famous grown-ups believed. Miss Hussey was cool. D-E-A-D. She had written it on the board. They were talking about letters that morning because Calder had groaned about having to write a thank you note and said that it was always a waste of time. No one cared what you put in a letter. Then Miss Hussey asked if anyone in the class had ever received a truly extraordinary letter. No one had. Miss Hussey looked very interested. They had ended up with a strange assignment. "Let's see what we can find," Miss Hussey began. "Ask an adult to tell you about a letter they will never forget. I'm talking about a piece of mail that changed their life. How old were they when they got it? Where were they when they opened it? Do they still have it?" Petra, like Calder, was fascinated by their new teacher. She loved Miss Hussey's questions, and her long ponytail, and the 3 rings in each ear. One earring had a small pearl dangling from a moon, another a high-heeled shoe the size of a grain of rice, another a tiny key. Petra loved how Miss Hussey listened carefully to the ideas and didn't care about right and wrong answers. She was honest and unpredictable. She was close to perfect. Miss Hussey suddenly clapped her hands, making Petra jump and setting the little pearl earring into orbit. "I know! Once you find a letter that changed a life, sit down and write me a letter. Write me a letter I won't be able to forget." Petra's mind was already racing. Calder pulled a pentomino piece out of his pocket. It was an L. He grinned. For letter. This letter was definitely not dead. L was one of the simplest pentomino shapes to use. Most letters, the kind you mailed, were rectangles. He realized, just like an accurately put together pentomino solution. L was also the 12th letter in the alphabet and one of the 12 pentominos. Today was the 12th day of October. Calder's grandmother had once told him that he breathed patterns the way other people breathed air. Calder sighed. If only thoughts didn't have to be broken down into words. Too much talk was hard to listen to, and writing for him was a brutal process. So much got left behind. Miss Hussey ended the class by saying, "Got it? First find, then do. Who knows where this will take us?" Calder and Petra lived on Harper Avenue, a narrow street next to the train line. Their houses were 3 blocks away from the U School and 3 houses away from each other. They often passed on the street, but they had never been friends. Families came from all over to study or teach at the University of Chicago, and many of them lived in this part of Hyde Park. Since most parents worked, young kids traveled on their own around the campus and to and from school. On the afternoon of October 12th, Petra walked home from school with Calder half a block ahead of her. She watched him fish around for his key and open his front door. She knew his pockets were full of puzzle pieces. He sometimes muttered things and always looked like he had just woken up. He was kind of weird. Scuffing through the first fall leaves, Petra drifted into the game she often played with herself. Ask a question that doesn't have an answer. Why was yellow cheerful, she wondered, and why was it always a surprise, even when it came in an ordinary shape, like a lemon or an egg yolk? Picking up a yellow leaf, she held it in front of her face. Maybe she would write to Miss Hussey about this. She'd ask her if she agreed that humans needed questions more than answers. Calder, at that moment, looked out his front window to see Petra walking by holding a leaf several inches from her nose. He knew he was kind of weird, but she was exceptionally weird. She was always by herself at school and didn't seem to care. She was quiet when other kids were loud. Plus, she had a fierce triangle of hair that made her look like one of those Egyptian queens. Calder wondered if he was becoming just as much of an oddball. No one had asked him what he was doing after class that day. No one had told him to wait. He'd taken his buddy Tommy's presence for granted. Not now. Tommy Segovia had lived across the street from Calder until this past April. They had been great friends since second grade, when Tommy poured his chocolate milk on Calder's bare legs and asked him how it felt. A teacher rushed over, and Calder had explained that it was an experiment and that it felt just perfect. That was the first of many collaborations. He and Tommy had decided back in July that they weren't going to be mediocre kids. They swore that they were going to do something important with their lives, solve a great mystery, or rescue somebody, or be so smart in school that they'd skip grades. That was the same day Calder had received his first set of pentominoes. A cousin in London had sent them as a 12th birthday present, even though Calder's birthday wasn't until the end of the year. The pentominoes were yellow plastic and clacked against the kitchen table in a satisfying, decisive way. Determined, Calder moved the shapes into one combination after another, flipping and turning them. The biggest rectangle he had put together so far was 6 pieces. A breeze was coming in the back door, and some mourning doves that had nested on the back porch were cooing, making that slippery, burbling sound that Calder always associated with summer in his neighborhood. Every detail of that morning with Tommy was strangely clear. At once, Calder had known what to do. The Y had slid into the U, which had to fit next to the P. He even remembered the sequence of letters. Yup, Y-U-P. He had gotten his first 12-piecer and gotten it fast. When he looked up afterward, he saw the pentomino shapes echoed in the kitchen. The hinges on the cabinets were L's. The water faucets were X's. The burners on the stove stood up neat on N legs. Maybe the entire world could be communicated in some kind of pentomino code, kind of like a Morse code. He knew at that moment that he would be a great problem solver. Or so he told Tommy, who punched him in the arm and told him that he had a swelled head. Yup, he said with a grin. Y-U-P. Calder's head didn't feel too swelled these days. He looked at the clock. He was already late. When Tommy moved away, Calder had taken over his job at Powell's Used Books. Calder helped out one afternoon a week now, delivering books in the neighborhood and unloading boxes. With Tommy gone, it was something to do. Calder gulped a glass of chocolate milk, stuffed a cookie in each cheek, and set off at a run. Powell's was one of Petra's favorite places. It was peaceful, and you never knew what you might find. It looked more like a warehouse than a store. Books were piled everywhere, and the rooms were jumbled together in a mismatched way. Although Petra had been inside many times, it always felt like a labyrinth. One dimly lit area led to the next, and suddenly you were back where you started without knowing how you got there. No one asked if you needed help. No one frowned if you read but didn't buy. Petra's mom had sent her to get milk and bread at the grocery store around the corner. Powell's was on the way. Petra had just settled herself on a footstool with a copy of Kidnapped when she saw a long ponytail whip by. Miss Hussey. Petra stood up carefully. She peeked around the corner, ready to pretend to look surprised. There was no one in sight. Petra looked across rows of cookbooks. She tiptoed carefully through the next room, past English, history, psychology, and pets. She only wanted to see what Miss Hussey was reading. Darn! The next person she saw was Calder. He was bending over a box of books, a piece of paper in his hand. Don't turn around. Don't you dare turn around, Petra thought. She didn't want anyone from the class to see her spying. She tiptoed around the corner. Miss Hussey was crouched by the art books. Petra couldn't see what she was looking at, but she noticed several paperbacks next to her on the floor. Agatha Christie, Raymond Chandler. Miss Hussey moved suddenly, and Petra jumped backward. To her surprise, Calder was right behind her. He had obviously seen what she was doing. Petra cupped her hand quickly as if to cover his mouth, but stopped before she touched him. They looked equally shocked. Calder, recovering first, peered around the corner. He ducked back in a flash. "She's coming!" It felt too late to do anything but hide, so they hurried out of history and into fiction. Ms. Hussey was at the front desk now. She plopped down her books and began talking to Mr. Watch, the man with red suspenders who was usually at the cash register. They were laughing. Did they know each other? "Can you see what she has?" Petra whispered. Calder walked quickly behind their teacher, his eyes on the counter. Miss Hussey never turned her head. "Murder and a big art book. Never something," he muttered to Petra when he returned. Miss Hussey left the store with her purchases. A moment later, Petra ducked outside empty-handed, her cheeks burning. She was furious with herself. Powell's had always been her private hideaway, her refuge. Now she'd spoken to Calder there. She'd practically attacked him. And he'd seen her spying on Miss Hussey. What had she started? So there you guys have chapter 2. Remember in the beginning of books how sometimes things can seem to be moving just a little bit slower than we like. That's when we buckle down and really dive into figuring out who these characters are. Sketch note them, try to figure out them as if they're puzzles. What makes them tick? What makes them motivated? Why are they doing what they're doing? And when you put all of that together, then you really understand your character. And when it gets to the more action-packed parts of the book, you really feel like you're on that adventure with them. And speaking of sketch notes, I'm dying to see what you guys came up with today. So have your parents take a photo of your sketch notes and either send them to me through text messages, or they can email them to me, or you guys can email them to me as long as your parents know you're on technology. And we'll get them posted to our Google Classroom so everybody can see what we're all thinking as we read through Chasing Vermeer. I'll check in with you guys tomorrow. Miss you. Bye.